So our presentation is on ABC narrative recording. So scientist Sidney Bajou, I'm not quite sure if I pronounced that right, developed ABC narrative recording. When was this method developed and when was it first used/published? ABC narrative recording was first developed in 1968 in a research paper influencing the way that behavior was recorded. What is the client profile intended for this method? ABC narrative recording is intended for clients that work in a public environment, such as a classroom where what happens both before and after target behavior can be recorded. How is ABC narrative recording administered? ABC narrative recording collects and records data both before and after the target behaviors begin. ABC narrative recordings may be used for a hypothesis, provide support for a function identified via another method, and help inform the choice of other methods for the observation. So these are some strengths versus limitations of ABC narrative recording. Some strengths would be that it focuses on behaviors of all students as opposed to just one particular child and one particular behavior. It's also relatively less subjective, and it provides ongoing descriptions of the events that take place during the observation, both before and after the target behavior occur in real time. However, some limitations of ABC narrative recording could be that they typically do not contain quantitative data. So, for example, it won't contain the number of times the client raises his hand or the number of times the client has a tantrum. It's also very time consuming and may be difficult for the observer to track all behaviors. And the client may be aware that they are being observed, which could trigger the client to be on their best behavior.
The first article is called Using ABC Narrative Recording to Identify the Function of Problem Behavior, a pilot study done by Lanovas and colleagues. The way ABC narrative recording was used in this was an interviewer would conduct a QABF, questions about behavioral function, with the caregiver, and then the interviewer would teach the caregiver how to conduct the ABC narrative recording and collect data on target problem behavior whenever it occurred. This data was then given to a trained professional blind to the QABF and ABC narrative analysis results, who would then conduct an FA, and then the results from the FA was matched up with the results from the ABC recording. The participants were 4 children diagnosed with a developmental disability aging from 3 to 13 years. 2 of them were male, 2 of them were female. 3 out of the 4 were diagnosed with autism, and 1 had a mild intellectual disability. The places where the QABF and the analysis was conducted was at the homes of every child except for 1 who had the QABF and descriptive analysis done at her house, and then the FA was conducted at an early intervention center. The administrators were parents. 2 of them were mothers, 1 was a father, and then the 1 caregiver. Yeah, those were the who collected the data and responded to the QABF, and then trained professionals conducted the functional analysis. The results from this study was that ABC narrative recording can be used on its own to correctly predict the function of a behavior, and that the functions identified by the reviewers of the ABC narrative data always partially or exactly match the results of the FA.
The second article is Comparisons of Functional Behavior Assessment Procedures to the Functional Analysis of Problem Behavior by Romani and his colleagues. They used ABC narrative recording to observe and document data for each of the children that are in the study when the following behaviors occurred: negative statements, aggression, property destruction, disrobing, preservative speech, and self-injury. They came up with operational definitions so everyone knew what these behaviors looked like. They did this through their initial interview with the parents. After the data was collected, they came together with other BCBAs and they all decided on what the function of the behavior was for each of the children. They then would compare their answers and finally determine which the function was. In this study, there were 14 children who all displayed socially reinforced problem behavior, like mentioned previously. There were 10 boys and 4 girls. They conducted their observation in a classroom that was in a psychiatric unit. The ones who observed and collected the data were BCBAs. The results that came up were that the BCBAs were able to come together and decide on a function of the behavior for each of the children in the study.
We continue our approach by our application through a case study. Jaden is a 10 years old boy diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He lives with his mother and older brother. Jaden is high functioning. He can communicate well verbally and complete tasks without a lot of support, but requires a lot of coaxing to engage in tasks. Jaden's mom reports that at home he is very withdrawn and spends most of his time playing games on the shared family computer or organizing his Pokemon cards. Jaden doesn't like sharing the computer with his mom or brother and will begin crying, screaming, and hitting his mom or brother if they are using the computer when he wants to, until they allow him to use the computer. During dinner, Jaden eats very little and will state that he is finished after a few bites and often doesn't stay in his seat at the table, and his mom has to repeatedly tell him to sit down and even sometimes leave the dinner table to find him and bring him back. When Jaden's mom or brother tell him to eat more, he begins crying and will throw himself onto the floor until mom tells him he no longer has to eat more. Jaden attends a public elementary school and has an individualized education plan, wherein he is in a non-behavioral 5th grade classroom for math, science, French, and health, but joins a smaller classroom with other students who have an IEP for language and social study lessons. Jaden does not sit at his desk for a long period of time and prefers to sit or lay down on the rag in the classroom. Jaden spends most of his class time reading his Pokemon catalog, and his teacher has to redirect him to do classwork several times as he cannot stay productive for a long period of time unless teacher allows him to take a break for screen time to play a computer game. During lesson, Jaden does not sit still on the rag, bouncing up and down and crawling around on the carpet, and will often speak over the teacher or entrap the teacher during a question as a response to the lesson matter. Using this ABC narrative chart, we have recorded some behaviors with antecedents and consequences. For example, when mom or brother using computer, Jaden approaches computer desk wanting to use it but sees someone else is using it. Then it leads to the behavior that Jaden starts crying and screaming at mom or brother to let him use it and begins hitting them with his hands. And the consequences that mom or brother gives him access to the computer. The second antecedent is when at the dinner table Jaden eating very little, mom or brother tells Jaden to eat more. That antecedent leads to the behavior that Jaden starts crying and falls to the floor. The consequences that mom tells Jaden he does not have to eat more. And the third instance is that the antecedent is that In class during work period, Jaden is instructed to do classwork at his desk. It leads to the behavior that Jaden leaves his desk to lay on classroom rag and read his Pokemon book. It leads to the consequence that teacher redirects him to his desk to do schoolwork, allow him to have a break to play computer game if he does a certain amount of work.